back with comedian Boyle, and I'm quitting alcohol. So we are back in class this week with another episode of The Wisdom of Evan. Some people weren't too happy with Ev last week. Cunts didn't want to move to Saudi Arabia. They didn't want to take their family to Oman. They didn't feel like living in the desert in a Sharia law fucking country. I'm shocked. I'm saddened for your sovereignty. Anyway, this week was a little tough one. I had two articles I could have chosen from. I had an article called Australia Under Quiet Extraction, which hit close to home, and it was a brilliant article, and I really feel like reading it out, but I just feel like we needed to go a little broader with the theme than Australia, so I've chosen another one. This week's Wisdom of Evan, an article from Cold State Capital. If you can't beat the system, position as a junior partner inside it. What means justify what ends? Here we go. In the last article, I wrote about how Australia's dual party system has placed Australians in an extractive loop, and I suggested some methods of escaping it. This article is a more pragmatic approach. It is about joining the system when you cannot defeat it, then leveraging that position to bend the system later from the inside, from strength. And it does not just apply to Australians, it applies to most citizens around the world, because the same extraction architecture runs with regional variations across nearly every country inside the current global financial order. The premise. Start with the uncomfortable premise. You cannot change a system from a position of weakness. Every labour movement that won meaningful ground did so because it had capital reserves behind it, strike funds that could outlast the employer's patience, newspapers and halls that it owned outright, lawyers who were paid for by collective dues. Every civil rights movement that moved law did so because it had wealthy patrons, funded legal arms, and institutional endowments that could survive the decades of litigation the change actually required. Every sovereignty movement that defeated an empire did so because it had resource revenue, foreign state patronage, or a diaspora remittance base funding the fight. The romantic image of pure grassroots power defeating institutional capital is rare in history, and where it appears, the capital base is usually hidden rather than absent. The pure wage worker is not in a position to change anything structural. That is not a moral judgment, it is a logistical one. The wage worker's income stops the moment the employer stops the payroll. The wage worker's housing depends on the employer's continued willingness to pay. The wage worker's insurance, medical access, and often immigration status are all functions of the employment relationship. A population organized entirely around wages is a population that can be disciplined by the simple threat of unemployment, and any political movement built exclusively from that population can be dispersed by the same threat. The extraction class understands this perfectly. It is why every serious policy shift in the last 40 years has made employment more precarious, housing more expensive, and savings rates for the working majority lower. A precarious population does not organize, it survives. Power. So the first move before any collective political action becomes sustainable is to get yourself into a position where you can afford to take political action at all. That means capital. Not billionaire capital, enough capital to make you ungovernable by the immediate threat of losing next month's income. This is not selling out, this is a precondition for not selling out. The principle is the same in every country operating inside the current financial order. The system rewards capital and punishes labor. It rewards asset holders and punishes wage earners. It rewards lenders and punishes borrowers. Inflation, monetary policy, tax law, retirement rules, property incentives, dividend treatment, and capital gains concessions are all engineered to move value from people who only own their time to the people who own the productive assets. This is true in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in Australia, in most of the European Union, in much of Latin America, in the financialized parts of Asia, and increasingly in the Gulf. The specifics differ, the direction is identical. Once you see this, the strategy writes itself. Stop being only a worker, start also being an owner. Ownership. Own the extraction directly. The companies that are extracting rent from your daily life are, in most cases, publicly listed. You can buy shares in them. If oil and gas majors are taking resource wealth out of your country, the same oil and gas majors are available to you through your local exchange or through a global brokerage. If the banks charging you interest on your mortgage are earning a fat margin on that interest, those banks are publicly listed and they pay dividends. If the supermarket duopoly or triopoly in your region is pocketing the grocery inflation, those chains are publicly traded. If the telecoms extracting monthly bills from every household are paying dividends to shareholders, you can be one of those shareholders for the price of a single bill. The dividend stream that lands in your brokerage account every quarter is a slice of the same extraction that has been flowing past you your entire working life, now redirected to you instead of away from you. Vehicles. Use the same vehicles the institutions use, index funds and exchange-traded funds from Vanguard, BlackRock's iShares line, State Street's SPDR line, and their regional equivalents hold the same companies the global asset managers hold, in the same proportions at near zero fees. A broad domestic equity ETF in your country plus a broad international equity ETF covering the developed world, or a single global fund covering both, replicates the core holdings of most institutional portfolios for less than it costs to run a bank account. When you buy units in one of these funds, you are not fighting BlackRock, you are standing next to BlackRock. The architecture does not care who owns the units, it extracts either way. The only question is whether the dividends flow to a pension fund in New York or to your retirement account. That is an infrastructure choice you control. Use every tax advantage retirement structure your country offers. Every financialized country has engineered retirement wrappers designed to hold the population's savings inside the equity market over decades, because the capital is the raw material of the financial system itself. The 401k and the IRA in the United States, the ISA and personal pensions in the United Kingdom, the RRSP and the TFSA in Canada, superannuation in Australia, the PEA in France, the Reister in Germany, the NPS in India. These are not gifts from benevolent state. They are engineered vehicles that align your savings behavior with the financial system's need for long duration capital. You do not need to feel sentimental about them. You need to use them. Contributions usually enter pre-tax. Growth is usually sheltered. Withdrawals are usually concessional. A 1% fee reduction compounded over a 40-year working life frequently doubles the final balance. Check what your default fund charges. Move to a low-fee index option if one exists. Contribute at least the maximum matched amount if your employer matches. If the regime allows voluntary contributions with tax advantages, Use them up to your capacity. Assets. Hold real assets. The system cannot inflate away. Every fiat currency in the world is actively losing value against real assets over any time frame longer than a decade. This is not a bug in the system. It is the system's operating mechanism. Money printing, interest rate suppression, and deficit spending transfer purchasing power from currency holders to asset holders, quietly and continuously. In every country that runs a central bank, the defense against this is simple. Own things. Productive land where you can access it, residential property where the market is accessible and the leverage is sustainable, equity in a business because a business is a claim on real cash flows priced in real goods. The common feature is that they are claims on real things, not paper denominated in a currency that the central banks and governments can dilute at will. Reduce consumer debt aggressively and stop being a marginal borrower. The financial system earns the spread between what it pays depositors and what it charges borrowers. The further you position yourself toward the lender side of that ledger, the more of your income you keep. Credit card balances, buy now, pay later schemes, payday loans, auto loans carried past their useful life, and consumer installment plans are the mechanisms by which the bottom 50% of any wealthy country is kept in permanent wealth transfer to the top 5%. Every percentage point of interest you are paying on consumer debt is a percentage point of your future that you have already sold. Pay these down with the same urgency you would pay off a ransom, because that is what they are. Use the legal tax structures the wealthy use: family trusts, holding companies, investment loan structures, retirement contribution strategies, income splitting agreements, timing of capital gains, and jurisdiction of residence planning. These exist in every developed tax code because decades of lobbying built them into the code for the benefit of the people who already had capital. They are legal. They are usually documented in plain sight in the tax legislation. A competent accountant who specializes in personal wealth, retained for a few hours a year, will pay for itself many times over by explaining which of these structures apply to your situation. The middle class refusal to engage with this material, usually framed as some kind of principled naivety, is not virtue. It is a recurring transfer of money you could have kept to people who did engage with it and kept theirs. Go global. If you're part of cold state capital, you're already doing this. Diversify internationally across assets. Your home country is a single concentrated bet on a single political and economic trajectory. Every serious family office in the world holds assets across multiple jurisdictions and multiple currencies, because no single country's political class can be trusted indefinitely. Global equity index funds, international real estate exposure through listed trusts, holdings denominated in more than one currency, and where legal and practical, accounts in more than just one jurisdiction are the modern expression of a principle the wealthy have always practiced. The multipolar transition that is visibly underway at the geopolitical level is also a personal portfolio reality. The same asset managers who built the American financial architecture are now repositioning into the multi-center order that is replacing it. You can make the same repositioning in miniature in your own portfolio for the cost of a few trades. Education. Become financially literate and stay that way. Financial education is deliberately undertaught in the school systems of most financialized countries because financially illiterate populations are more profitable than financially literate ones. The consequence is that most working adults do not know the difference between a managed fund and an index fund. do not know how compound interest actually works over long periods, do not know how to read a tax return, do not know what their own retirement account is invested in. This is not because the information is hidden. It is free. It is on the internet, in hundreds of books, in podcasts, in public educational materials. The reason most people do not know it is that the system has trained them to find it boring, technical, or morally distasteful to think about. That conditioning is itself an extraction mechanism. The population that feels that money is vulgar to think about is the population that will have none of it. Morality. Now, the moral close, which is the whole point of this piece, and which the previous sections were in service of. The strategy described here makes you a small participant in the same extraction architecture you would prefer did not exist. That is real, and it should be uncomfortable. What makes it defensible is what you intend to do with the position once you have it. If the goal is simply to get rich and then disengage from the political struggle, then you have not resisted the system. You have merely joined it at a lower rank. That is the trap every generation of comfortable middle class has fallen into. That was the trap I fell into, but got out of. They accumulated enough to insulate themselves, then went quiet, and the arrangement continued unchallenged because the people with the capacity to challenge it had been bought off by the modest comfort of having slightly more than their neighbors. The alternative, the one that actually matters, is to treat the capital you accumulate as the ammunition rather than the insulation. A household that is financially secure can afford to fund independent media, to donate to political candidates the major parties do not want to fund, to stop legal challenges, to run in local elections, to house organizers, to print and distribute the kind of material that the concentrated media will not carry, to sustain long campaigns that wage earners cannot afford to engage with. 1,000 financially secure households in a country can change that country in a way 100,000 precarious households cannot, because security is the raw material of a sustained political action in ways that desperation is not. This is the circuit that the extraction class does not want you to close. They are comfortable with you being poor and angry because poor and angry is loud and short and easily broken. They are comfortable with you being comfortable and silent because comfortable and silent is the default state of their clientele. They are not comfortable with you becoming financially secure and then using that security to bend the system back toward its own populations. That combination is the threat. It is also the only combination that has ever produced structural reform from below. The Yeoman Farmer Republics, the cooperative movements of the late 19th century, the Labour parties founded by skilled artisans with capital of their own, the civil rights networks funded by black-owned banks and churches with endowments, the independence movements seeded by merchant diasporas. In every case, the base was not pure wage labor. The base was a secured middle that could afford to act. Get yourself into that middle, then refuse to go quiet. That is the strategy. That is the whole game. Well, people, class is dismissed for another week. I hope you took notes. That'll do for tonight, and I'll see you the fuck later.